We are still having people trickle in from the Zoom, so I'm going to just wait one moment before I introduce our service leader today. Okay. Rabbi Jula Andelman was ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary in 2006. She has served as the rabbi of Congregation Sarah Tzedek in Manhattan and in community education roles at Park Avenue Synagogue, at Shalom Hartman, and also at the Jewish Theological Seminary. She has recorded 2 audio CDs of Jewish liturgical music, including one on the bedtime Shema. And we are, I don't want to say blessed, but we have the opportunity to hear her voice today in not as sweet a musical moment as the Shema, but I will stop chatting. I invite you to use the chat. Right now it's closed. I will see your messages and will relay important themes over to Rabbi Julia Andelman, who may open the chat at other points, but I will now turn it over to you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much, Mara. I'm honored to be with everyone, and I want to thank My Jewish Learning for inviting me to be with you today. Now I can only see myself. I will make do. All right. Okay. So, Mara, I'm sorry. Is it possible to unspotlight me and people can use speaker view so that I can see folks' faces?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right, that's better. Okay. So we don't know each other, and I don't know what everyone's kind of past experiences are with Tisha B'Av and what the day means to you. And I'm going to ask you in a moment. And I imagine also that there's a wide range of experience in Jewish backgrounds here. So hopefully what I can offer will, be meaningful for most people, and apologies if there are things that are too elementary or too advanced. I'm trying to strike that middle road. Those who were on the class last night about Tisha B'Av and others may have learned elsewhere, learned that Tisha B'Av is a place where the rabbis just kind of throw a lot of tragedy into one day. The initial prompt is, of course, the destruction of the temple, the destruction actually of both temples, which, as best we can tell historically, actually did happen several hundred years, but a few days apart on the calendar, right around Tisha B'Av. And the rabbis in the Talmud also list several other tragedies. And they kind of build Tisha B'Av into basically a vessel for meditating on tragedy, reflecting on tragedy, and grieving tragedy, and mourning the loss. I've always thought about the way that Tisha B'Av has kind of been most meaningful for me over the course of my life is thinking about the temple as a symbol of Jewish unity, a place where Jews came together to worship and celebrate and do other things, but as kind of one community. And that tends to be what I'm mourn the loss of most actively on Tisha B'Av, but there are a lot of different things to mourn. There is, as many of you probably know, a story in the Talmud, I'm not going to go into it now, but about Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, that actually explicitly goes in that direction, that it's because Jews weren't being kind to each other, that the temple was, the destruction of the temple was ultimately triggered by this kind of social interaction in which one person felt shamed and rejected. So there is that theme, but there's also physical and at times nearly existential destruction that the Jewish people have gone through in ancient times, and obviously much more recently in the 20th century. And this year, we're marking Tisha B'Av in, a year like no other in terms of what has been happening in Israel and with its neighbors, and which has felt so acute for so many of us for the last many, many months. If you've been in Israel this year on a mission or something like that, you may have seen what for me were really indelible images of destruction in Kibbutz Kfar Aza, for example, burned homes and things that are really eerily and uncomfortably similar to what's described in the Book of Eicha that we're going to be reading shortly. And the whole world has seen massive destruction among Gazan civilians, and we don't want to get into politics, but there is a lot to mourn in the world today, both for our people and far beyond. So the rabbis designated this day for that, and I just want to say a little bit more about the content of the Book of Eicha to kind of focus us as we go into it. In ancient times, one core element of theology was that if bad things are happening to you, it's because you did something to deserve them. And really on a kind of national scale, if there isn't rain, it's because the Jewish people have strayed from the path, and it's the job of the prophets to try to prevent that sort of thing from happening, the job of prayer. But this is like a core aspect of ancient theology. It's actually recited twice a day, every day in the second paragraph of the Shema. God says to people, if you're good, I'll do all these good things for you. And if not, then not. And that's, a challenging theology for us today. And also, on the other hand, it may be intellectually challenging and also sometimes something that we can relate to, right? It's not actually so uncommon when things are going badly to feel like I somehow brought this on myself. I made this huge mistake and like I caused this whole thing that I'm going through or that someone else is going through. So there's that complicated theology and I would say tension around that theology, for us today, I would say for many people, maybe kind of believing and not believing that idea at the same time. There are other complicated and conflicting ideas happening in the Book of Eicha, and I actually would just offer as a metaphor when one is going through a personal experience of loss and grief. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that it's not one thing that you feel, right? There was a relationship there, and or whatever it is that one has lost. There's always complexity to it. So it's the same in the Book of Eicha. The way the Jewish people and God are relating in the Book of Eicha, again, is mixed. There's kind of, we did everything to deserve this destruction, and then there's also very much a sense of, given the extreme and repeated and kind of endless terms in which the suffering is described, I think there really is a sense also like, this is too much, God. Did we really sin this badly that you're bringing this onto us? So I would say it really is a book that kind of embodies multiple emotions and just like the day itself. And I would just offer that I think the rabbis kind of intended that, that like to basically, the author of the Book of Eicha, whether it was Jeremiah or some other ancient author, and then the rabbis hundreds of years later in kind of creating this day for us, I think both the book and the day actually really are meant to be a vessel for a complicated mix of contradictory emotions and beliefs. And you'll see this as we read. You'll see a lot of, again, images of destruction, emotion around destruction, despair, agony, some very graphic images of kind of specifics of destruction that can be hard to take, and then also notes of comfort and faith, and God hasn't abandoned us. But you have in one book really like God has forsaken us, and I'm still praying to God, and God won't forsake me. So it's a vessel for that. And one thing I just want to point out as we kind of look more directly now at the book, we'll screen share it as we read. The Book of Eicha is Lamentations in English is actually sort of shockingly orderly. It's 5 chapters. There's a lot of symmetry to it. The first 2 chapters and the last 2 chapters each have 22 verses, one for each letter of the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet. And 3 of those 4 are actually acrostics going through the alphabet. So very, very orderly. And then the middle chapter is actually a triple acrostic. It's 3 verses for each, 3 aleph verses, 3 bet verses, etc. So it's symmetrical. It goes on multiple levels according to an order with which we're very familiar. And I think that's, again, like Tisha B'Av, kind of an attempt to create a vessel, create a space, create a text for us to go through this complicated mix of emotions. So that's kind of by way of introduction about Eicha. I wanted to note very briefly also about the trope, or in Hebrew, Ta'amei HaMikra, or in English, cantillation. The various texts that we read liturgically each have their own set of melodic motifs, and you will hear that the traditional Ashkenazi Eicha trope that I'll use is quite mournful, and these different tropes are really meant to evoke vibe, for lack of a better term, of the book, and I think, in my opinion, do so very successfully. All right, finally, I just want to note kind of how we're going to proceed. And I know this is different from, normally, I know there's now a lot of kind of ritually oriented programs in my Jewish learning as well, but I imagine a lot of you normally tune in for classes. So we're not here for a class tonight. It really is a ritual observance, but we also, because we're not in a physical space together, we wanted there to be an outlet for you to express if you feel that would make you feel more engaged. So the way we're going to structure this is I'm going to read each of the 5 chapters. Before each one, I'll just say a few words of introduction, kind of highlighting some themes, some verses, and then we'll keep the chat closed. But as I'm reading the chapter, obviously you're welcome to follow along. And if you're moved to share a reflection in the private chat to Mara, please do so. And then we'll just pause briefly after each chapter, and if there are reflections shared, Mara will share a little bit with the group. That will give my voice a break and again sort of bring us into a shared space together in so kind of a virtual religious community. All right, so before we introduce and then read the first chapter, I did want to open the chat for a moment and invite those who want to put a word about kind of where you are, like what's the headspace or heart space that you're finding yourself in on this Tisha B'Av. What are you kind of looking for out of tonight? What are you struggling with? And again, just to kind of bring us into community together for a moment before we begin. We were planning to play a song at this point, and we had technical difficulties. So we'll just have a moment or two of quiet, and those who wish can share where they are in this moment as we begin Tisha B'Av together. I'll share a little bit out loud for the sake of the recording. There are folks who are grieving and mourning personal losses in their families, nostalgia, calm, regret, appreciation, fear, thinking about the hostages, struggling with life changes, uncertainty around personal issues, kind of the presentness and realness of a book about destruction, given everything since October 7th, mourning for deaths in Gaza and Israel, reflecting on Jewish history, praying for friends and family, loving kindness for all who are suffering. Many, many beautiful, beautiful thoughts and feelings being shared here. So thank you so much. Thank you so much to everyone for doing that. We'll close the chat in a moment. But it's beautiful to connect to where you are. So thank you very much. All right. So we'll read the first chapter. And like I said, I'll just highlight before each chapter some themes and verses. Some of the there's really kind of all of the themes happening in almost every chapter, but some of the themes that we encounter immediately in the first chapter are emptiness, aloneness. The book starts out talking about the city. The city sits alone. A city that was once full of people now sits alone. Exile, children and leaders alike having been taken captive. There's also definitely a focus on kind of sinfulness, as I mentioned before in the general intro, and thinking of Israel, the people of Israel, as and kind of the city as embodying the people as an object of scorn, also a very repeated theme throughout the book. Invasion of enemies, hunger, and a lot of emotion, really despair and agony and anguish at the extent of the destruction. And then finally, quite a lot on kind of punishment and rejection from God. I'll just highlight for you a couple of verses that you can that may be helpful to illustrate those themes. So as I mentioned, the book begins, lonely sits the city once great with people, that theme of aloneness. In verses 8 and 9, Jerusalem has greatly sinned. She's become a mockery. All who admired her despise her. They see her disgraced. There's an image of menstrual impurity that's used a few times in the book, so that's here as well. Her uncleanness clings to her skirts. She has sunk appallingly. No one to comfort her. How the enemy jeers. This theme of punishment from God. From above, God sent fire down into my bones, hurled me backwards, left me forlorn and constant misery. There's very strong language in this book. It does not hold back. And one of the most famous and beautiful psukim verses from the Book of Eicha is verse 16. For these things do I weep, my eyes flow with tears. Far from me is any comforter who might revive my spirit. So those are a few kind of anchor points, if it's helpful, for the first chapter. And again, Mara will close the chat if she hasn't already, and you can feel free if you want, no pressure at all, to share private reflections as we read. I'm already feeling the lack of water, but this is not a performance. rather a communal reading. So it will come out however it comes out. Eicha yasheva vatad hayira batiyam hayeta ke'almana rabati vagoyim sarati b'madinot hayeta lamas bachot yivke balayla v'timata alecheya אין לך מנחם מכל אוהביה, כל ראיה בכתובה, היו לה לאויבים. גלתה יהודה מעוני ומרוב עבודה, היא ישבה בגויים, לא מצאה מנוח, כל רודפיה השיגוה בין המצרים. דרכי ציון אבלות, מבלי באי מועד, כל שעריה שוממים, כהניה נאנחים, בתולותיה נוגות והיא מעלה. היו צריה לראש אויביה שלו, כי אדוני הוא גר רוב פשעיה. עולליה, הלכו שבי לפני צר. ויצא מבת ציון כל עדרה, היו שריה כאיילים לא מצאו מרעה, וילכו ולא כוח לפני רודף. זכרה ירושלים ימי אוניה, ומרותיה, כל מחמודיה, אשר היו מימי קדם, בנפול עמה ביצר, ואין עוזר לה, ראו הצרים, צחקו על משפטיה. חטא חטאה ירושלים, על כן נידה הייתה. כל מכבדיה הזילוה, כי ראו ערוותה, כי היא ננחה ותשוב אחור. טומאתה בשוליה, לא זכרה אחריתה, ותרא פלאים אין מנחם לה. ראה אדוני את עוני, כי הגדיל אויב. ידו פרסה על כל מחמדיה, כי ראתה גויים באו מקדשה, אשר ציווית לא יבוא הקהל לך. כל המננחים מבקשים לכם, נתנו מחמדיהם באוכל להשיב נפש. ראה אדוני והביטה, כי הייתי זוללה. לא עליכם כל עוברי דרך, הביטה וראו, אם יש מחוב כמחולי, אשר עלה לי, אשר הוגה אדוני ביום חרון אפו. ממרום שלח אש בעצמותי וירדנה, פרס רשת לרגלי, השיבני אחור, נתנני שוממה כל היום דבר. נזכר או בשי בידו, יסרגו עלו על צווארי, הכשיל כוחי, נתנני אדוני ביטל לא אוכל כלום. סילח כל אבירי אדוני בקרבי, קרא עלי מועד לשבור בחורי, בת דרך אדוני לבתולת בת יהודה. כל אלה אני בוכייה, איני יורד המים, כי רחק ממני, מנחם משיב נפשי. היו בניי שוממים, כי גבר אויב. ארץ הציון בידיה, אין מנחם לה. ציווה אדוני ליעקב סביביו צריו, הייתה ירושלים לנידה ביניהם. צדיקו אדוני כי פיהו מריתי, שמעונה כל העמים וראו מחולי, בתולותיי ובחוריי הלכו השבי. קראתי למה הווי המה רימוני, כהניי וזקניי בעיר גבהו. כי ביקשו אוכל עמו וישיבו את נפשם. ראה אדוני כי צר לי מאי חומרמרו, נפח ליבי בקרבי, כי מרו מריתי. מחוץ שיקל החרב, בבית כמוות. שמעו כי ננחני, אין מנחם לי. כל אויבי שמעו רעתי ששו, כי אתה עשית. הבאת יום קראת ויהיו כמוני. תבוא חרתם לפניך ועולל עולמו, כאשר עוללת לי על כל פשעי. כי רבות הנחותיי וליבי דווי.
Thank you. We're having some really big questions in the chat, like, are we redeemable? How can we work through our sadness? How can we be sad as individuals and as part of a wider group? And of course, there's people who are just feeling the sadness of this year and the extent of what it feels like to be lonely and lonely in Jewishness.
How did you describe it at the beginning? A lot of big, what did you say?
Big questions, big
questions, a lot of weight that people are feeling, a lot of fear.
And I'll give you a few more seconds to rest your voice. There were a lot of folks who were asking for the source sheet, and my apologies, it was hard to find that and flip the slides. So if you've joined in the last few minutes, you're welcome to take a look at the sources in the chat, and I will resume sharing screen in just a moment.
Thanks. Yeah. I hope that this space is a somewhat comforting vessel for some of these really big things that people are carrying, experiencing at this moment. So as we look ahead to chapter 2, there's a lot in chapter 2 about God's wrath against the people of Israel for having strayed, and wrath that really leads to extreme and near total destruction. There's more mourning, images of people sitting and crying, children hungry, asking for food. And again, this theme of being kind of jeered at and scorned and mocked by all those who see Israel and its destruction. I'm just thinking about the person who made the comment about loneliness as a Jew today. I think that's a little bit connected here. some of the I almost feel bad reading these in English because they're such difficult images. But anyway, in verse 20, see, O Lord, and behold, women eat their own offspring, their newborn babes. Priests and prophets are slain in the sanctuary. Prostrate in the streets lie both young and old, maidens and youths fallen by the sword. You, God, slew them on your day of wrath. You slaughtered without pity. So it's hard stuff there. I will also note another particular verse that has become famous and is I find very powerful. There are melodies written to it. Verse 19, pour out your heart like water in the presence of the Lord. Shifchi kamayim libech. Filling what's most inside out to God. So that's a little bit of intro for chapter 2, which I'll read now. Eicha יעיף באפו אדוני את בת ציון, השליך משמיים ארץ תפארת ישראל, ולא זכר אדם רגליו ביום אפו. בילה אדוני ולא חמל, את כל נאות יעקב הרס בעברתו. מבצרי בת יהודה הגיע לארץ, חילל ממלכה ושריה. גדיו אחורייו, כל קרן ישראל השיב אחור, ימינו מפני אויב. ויבער ביעקב כאש להבה, אכלה סביב. דרך קשתו כאויב, ניצב ימינו כצר, ויהרוג כל מחמדי עין. באוהל בת ציון שפך כאש חמתו. היה אדוני כאויב, בילה ישראל, בילה כל ארמנותיה, שחט מבצריו. וירב בבת יהודה ענייה וענייה. ויחמוס כגן סוכו, שחט מועדו. שיקח אדוני בציון מועד ושבת, וינעץ בזעם אפו מלך וכהן. זנח אדוני מזבחו, ניער מקדשו, הסגיר ביד אויב חומות ארמנותיה. כה נתנו בבית אדוני כי יום המועד. חשב אדוני להשחית חומת בת ציון, נתקף לא השיב ידו מבעליה. ויעבר חיל וחומה יחדיו ומללו. טבעו בארץ שעריה, איבד ושיבר בריחיה. מלכה ושריה בגויים אין תורה, גם נביאיה לא מצאו חזון מאדוני. ישבו לארץ ידמו זקני בת ציון, העלו עפר על ראשם, חגרו שקים. הורידי לארץ ראשן בתולות ירושלים. כלו בדמעות עיני, חמרמרו מעי, נשפך לארץ כביתי על שבר בת עמי. ויעטף עולל ויונק ברחובות קריה. למותם יאמרו איה דגן ויין. בהשתתפם תחלה ברחובות עיר, ישפך נפשם אל חיק אמותם. מעידך בת המלך, בת ירושלים, מה שפלך ונחמך, בתולת בת ציון. כי גדול קיים שברך מערפלך, נביאייך חזו לך שב ותפל, ולא גילו על עוונך להשיב שבותך. ויחזו לך מסעות שווא ומטוחים. ספקו עלייך כפיים כל עוברי דרך, שרקו ויניעו ראשם על בת ירושלים. הזאת העיר שיאמרו כלילת יופי, משוש לכל הארץ. פצעו עלייך פיהם כל אויבייך, שרקו ויחרקו שהן אמרו בי לנו. אך זה היום שקיווינו, מצאנו ראינו. עשה אדוני אשר זמם, ביצע אמרתו אשר ציווה מימי קדם, הרס ולא חמל. וישמח עלייך אויב, הרים קרן זרעייך, צעק ליבם אל אדוני. חומת בת ציון, הורידיך נחל דמעה יומם ולילה. אל תתני פוגעת לך, אל תדום בת עינך. קומי רוני בלילה, לראש השמורות שפכי חמים ליבך, נוכח פני אדוני. שאי אליו כפייך, על נפש עולייך, העטופים ברעב בראש כל חוצות. ראה אדוני והביטה, למי עוללת כה. אם תאכלנה נשים פריים עוללי טיפוחים, אם ייהרג במקדש אדוני כהן ונביא. שכבו לארץ חוצות נער וזקן, בתולותיי ובחוריי נפלו בחרב. הרגת ביום אפיך, טבחת ולא חמלת. תקרח ליום המועד מגורי מסביב, ולא היה ביום אף אדוני פליט ושריד. אשר טיפחתי וריביתי, אויבי חילם.
Barry wrote to me saying that it seems like there's a big shift from chapter 1 to chapter 2. It sounds like they're starting to get angry. And we have a few questions, just generally, when was this written? It doesn't necessarily invoke, based on what we've read so far, one particular tragedy. How can we think about the many tragedies that have both befallen Jerusalem and our world? And we also have some people complimenting you, Rabbi.
It's a response in its original context to the destruction of the first temple in 586 BCE. So I don't know exactly how, if it's contemporaneous. written by someone actually witnessing it, or kind of if the destruction has kind of lived in the I was going to say the imagination, but kind of the memory and the psyches of the community even after that. But that's the original prompt, as it were, for the book. So it's from quite a long time ago, this book. Anything else, Mara, before we go on to chapter 3?
I want to make sure that you can take a deep breath, but those are the main points that we see in the chat.
I'm actually very warm, so maybe share one more while I put my hair up.
No problem. I want to note that there are a lot of folks here who either haven't heard Eicha in many years, or maybe this is your first year. And this is quite the year to walk into this sort of practice. So thank you for being here and for holding all of us. I know even as we put this all together, having you all here is really meaningful for me. I may have missed some comments, but I'll keep taking a look, and I will.
That's good.
Great.
I can go ahead. For those who haven't heard Eicha before, or haven't in a long time, I hope that you're finding what you were hoping to find. Chapter 3 is a real shift. It's almost entirely, or certainly the first, the majority of it is in first person. So we've been talking about the destruction of Jerusalem and everything kind of being witnessed by a narrator, as it were. So the third chapter switches to first person, and an individual kind of lamenting his own suffering. It's definitely a man. I mentioned at the beginning, so the first 2 chapters that we just read were acrostics, each 22 verses for the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. This chapter is a triple acrostic. It's 66 verses. So for each of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, we have 3 verses. So it's by far the longest chapter by 3 times. So the first third or so is really this kind of first person description of intense suffering. Then there's a very marked shift around verse 21 to hope, comfort, a little bit of kind of philosophical introspection, but this kind of real sense of faith kind of floods back in a striking way after kind of this intense lament of real suffering. And then the last third is just a strange mix. There's agony. There's more kind of focusing again on sinfulness, on being the object of scorn, on punishment from God, but also there's hope and faith and comfort. So it really is an example of what I was saying at the beginning. It's kind of like a vessel for a lot of different themes going on. And I just want to note, and I wish I knew more about this, but before that. So yeah, just to highlight some of the content in case, I don't know if everyone's kind of following the screen share, if some people are just listening, but some of the, really striking verses here. God has worn away my flesh and skin, shattered my bones, made me dwell in darkness like those long dead. When I cry and plead, God shuts out my prayer. It's pretty intense stuff. That's from that first third. And then it really shifts, as I was saying, the kindness of the Lord has not ended. God's mercies are not spent. The Lord is my portion. I say with full heart, I will hope in God. The Lord is good to those who trust in God. It is good to wait patiently till rescue comes from the Lord. The Lord does not reject forever, but first afflicts, then pardons in God's abundant kindness. So that's that second third that really goes into a different space, and then then kind of this blend of themes afterwards. But I was just going to say before, so you'll hear in a moment that the melody is completely different for chapter 3, and I don't know why. And it actually doesn't even follow, it doesn't even really follow, it's not that it's a different trope. It kind of doesn't follow any trope. It's just a melody, which is quite rare for any of the biblical texts that we read. We have a little of that in the Song of the Sea, Shirat Hayam. There are some verses that we kind of sing in a certain melody, but that's kind of as a punctuated break from the regular trope. This is an entire very long chapter that just has its own melody. And no less mournful, in my opinion. So we'll read that now. אני הגבר, אני בשבט עברתו, אותי נהג ויולך, חושך ולאור, אך בי ישוב, יהפוך ידו כל היום. בילה בשרי ואורי, שיבר עצמותיי, בנה עלי ויקף ראש ותלה, במחשכים הושיבני כמתי עולם. גדר בדי ולא אצא, הכבי נחושי, גם כי אזעק ואשבע, סתם תפילתי. גדר דרכי בגזית, נתיבותי בה. טוב עורב הוא לי, ארי במסתרים, דרכי סורר ויפשחני, שמני שומם, דרך קשתו ויציבני, כמטרה לחץ. הביא בכליותי בני אשפתו, הייתי שחוק לכל עמי, נגינתם כל היום. הספיעני במרומים, ירבני לענה. ויגרס בחצץ שיני, הכפישני באפר. ותזנח משלום נפשי, נפשי טובה. ואומר עבד נצחי, ותאכלתי מאדוני. זכור עוני ומורדי לענה בראש, זכור תזכור, ותשוח עלי נפשי, זאת אשיב אל ליבי, על כן אוכיל. חסדי אדוני כי לא תמנו, כי לא כלו רחמיו, חדשים לו בקרים, רבה אמונתך. חלקי אדוני אמרה נפשי, על כן אוכילו. טוב אדוני לקרוביו, לנפש תדרשנו, טוב ויכיל ודומם, לתשועת אדוני, טוב לגבר כי שאול בנעוריו. ישב בצד פתאום, כי נטל עליו, ייתן באפר פיהו, לי יש תקווה, ייתן למכה ולכליס בה בחרפה. כי לא יזנח לעולם אדוני, כי מוגע בריחם כרוב חסדיו, כי לא ינע מליבו ויגע בני איש. לדכא תחת רגליו כל אסירי הארץ, להטות משפט גבר נגד פני עליון, לבית אדם בריבו, אדוני לא ראה. מי זה אמר ותהי, אדוני לא ציווה, מפי עליון לא תצא הרעות והטוב. מה יתונן אדם חי גבר על חטאיו? Nachvasa derachenu v'nachkora v'nashuva ad Adonai. Nisa levavenu el kapayim el bashamayim. Nachnu fashanu marinu ata lo salachta. Sakota va'af batir defeinu harakta lo chamalta. Sakota v'anan lach me'avor tefillah. Sechli u'ma'os tesimeinu b'kerev ha'amim. Atzu aleinu b'yem kol oyeveinu. Achad v'fachat hayalanu hashet ve'ashaber. Palgei mayim teredeni al sheber batami. Eini nigra v'lo tilmeh me'ein hafugot. Ad yashkif v'yehera Adonai mishamayim. Eini olala lenafshi mikol benotiri. Sod saduni katzipor, oyevai chinam. Tamatu vapor chayai, vayadu even vi, tzafu mayim al roshi, amarti nigzarti. Harati shimecha Adonai, mibor tachtiot. Koli shamatal, talem oznecha l'ravchati l'shavati. Harafta b'yom ekraecha, amarta al tira. Rafta Adonai rivei nafshi, ga'alta chayai. Ra'ita Adonai avatati, shofta mishpati. Ra'ita kol nikmatam, kol machshavotam li. Shamata cherpatam Adonai, kol machshavotam alai. Siftei kamai v'hegionam alai kol hayom. Shivtam v'kimatam abita ani manginatam. Tashiv lahem gemul Adonai k'maaseh yedehem. Titein lahem meginat lev talatecha lahem. Tirdof be'af betashmideim mitachat shemei Adonai.
Thank you. We're seeing some notes of confusion, actually, that there's, as you sort of began today's session, talking about how there's not one feeling, but there's many feelings, and how you can have hope and fear at the same time, it seems. So there's a lot of notes of the way that in this chapter things have switched back and forth. Yeah.
It's
And
sorry, go ahead.
and just some more big questions of whose fault is any of this, and how do we think about suffering at the hands of the divine, or at the hands of ourselves, is something that Bev wanted me to share, so I put that into the space.
It's so interesting, Mara. You know, the one party not blamed is the enemy, right? It's, you just said, whose fault is it? You know, is it God's? Is it ours? It's kind of fascinating that the actual, you know, they really imagine the oppressor as kind of a tool of God, not as if an entity acting on its own. It's very interesting. Yeah, it's a real emotional boomerang, that chapter. And even, I don't know if folks notice, there are even like even they're like within those sets of triplets, it can even switch within a triplet. Sort of, is it a sense of despair? Is there a sense of comfort? It's striking. So we're for chapter 4, we're back to the regular cantillation system that we used for the first 2 chapters. We're back again to a 22 verse chapter, yet again an acrostic. I didn't pick out specific verses to call to your attention for this one, but it's there's a lot of difficult images and images and concepts in the chapter. It's really the notes are kind of the extended notes of comfort and hope and faith that we had in chapter 3. We do not really encounter in chapter 4. It's really focused on suffering, on persecution, on being abandoned by God, and on feeling the object of scorn. So it's a hard chapter. איכה עם זהב ישנה הכתם הטוב, תשתפך לאבני קודש בראש כל חוצות, בני ציון היקרים המצולעים בפז, איכה נחשבו לנפלי חרס מעשה ידי יוצר. גם תנים חלצו שד, הניקו גוריהן, ותמי לאכזר, כיינים במדבר. טבק לשון יונק, אל חיכו בצמא, עוללים שאלו לחם, פורס אין להם. האוכלים למעדנים, נשמו בחוצות, האמונים עלי תולך, חיבקו השבתות. ויגדל עוון בתמים, מחטאת סדום, ההפוכה כמורגה, ולא חלו בידיים. זכו נזירה משלג, צחו מחלב, עד מועצם מפנינים, ספיר גזרתם. חשך משחור צהרם, לא ניכרו בחוצות, צפד אורם על עצמם, יבש היה כעץ. טובים היו חללי חרב, מחללי רעב. שהם יזופו מדוכרים, מתנובות שדי. ידי נשים רחמניות בישלו ילדיהם, היו לברות למו בשבר בתמי. כי לאדוני את חמתו שפך חרון אפו, ויצאת אש בציון ותאכל יסודותיה. לא האמינו מלכי ארץ כל יושבי תבל, כי יבוא צר ואויב בשערי ירושלים. מחטות נביאה, עוונות כהניה, השופכים בקרבה דם צדיקים. נעו עברים בחוצות, נגועלו בדם, ולא יוכלו ייגעו בלבושיהם. Suru tamei karu lamo. Suru al tiga'u. Kinatsu gamna'u. Ameru vagoyim lo yosifu lagur. Pnei Adonai chilakam lo yosif lahapitam. Pnei choanim lo nasa'u. Uzkenim lo chananu. Odenu tichlana einenu. Elas ratenu havel. Tzipiyatenu tzipinu el goy lo yoshia. Tzadutze adenu milechet birchovotenu. Karav kitzenu maleu yameinu kiva kitzenu. Kalim hayu rodefenu minishrei shamayim. El harim delakenu, el harim delakunu. Bamidbar arevulanu. Ruach Hapeinu Mashiach Adonai Nilkad Bishchitotam Asher Amarnu Betzilo Nichye Vagoyim Sisi V'Simchi Bat Edom Yoshevet Be'eretz Utz Gam Alayich Tafor Kos Tishkeri V'Titzari Tam avonech bat Zion, lo yosif lahaglotech. Pakad avonech bat Edom, hilal chatotayim.
Thank you. I have a few messages that just say the children, the babies. And I don't know how much more there is to say.
Yeah,
Just the recognition of loss as both part of the human condition, and also knowing that doesn't necessarily make it easier.
that's couldn't say a truer statement than that. And there are times I was stopping. I was finding it hard actually to get through some of those verses. It's a hard chapter.
Yeah. Both in terms of length and content. So thank you. Thank you. And as I give you a moment to breathe, I just invite everyone else to also take a deep breath. Like, this is an emotionally challenging text, and breathing through it hopefully can help. And someone wrote, cannibalism, seriously?
Yeah, and that's, there's a lot of maternal imagery throughout the book. I'm sure you've noticed, which, those are the lines that I find the hardest to read as a mother. I mean, the children kind of asking in vain for food and drink of their mothers, suckling without there being anything there. But yeah, all the more so it has to get really bad for a mother to eat her offspring, right? That we can all agree on. Yeah. This is one of those things where there's a lot of power to being together physically, and it's actually also amazing to be hearing these reflections from everyone between the chapters, which we wouldn't if we were not on Zoom. So thank you so much to everyone for being so present and for sharing so personally. So the last chapter is it's the one non-acrostic, and it's still 22 verses, but they're short verses. There's for those who do know a little bit about trope or Tamei Mikra, there's most psukim, most verses in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, have a ta'am, or a note called etnachta, which is, it's like, it divides between the first and second half of the verse. And if you're musically sensitive, you'll hear that those are all missing. They're very, very short verses in the last chapter. So I think, I don't know this, from a scholarly perspective, but the way I've thought of this is kind of by the time we get to the the fifth chapter, the author kind of knows we've had enough, and we need to we need to kind of come out of this space a little bit. So it's sort of a mercy on us to have these shorter verses that we move. It's like a light at the end of the tunnel. I know that's cliche, but that's how it feels a little bit to me. What I wanted to call attention to, especially in the fifth chapter, is what becomes the last verse, but isn't actually the last verse. Mara, were you able to make a slide for that one verse?
Yes.
Okay, so you'll see it when we get there, but the penultimate verse of the chapter is one that you may recognize from the Torah service. When we're putting away the Torah, we sing at the end, Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva chadesh yameinu kekedem. I don't love this translation, but anyway, take us back, O Lord, to yourself, and let us come back, renew our days as of old. So that's a very, a very hopeful, kind of forward-looking verse there. And that's the 21st verse. The 22nd verse is a really dark one again. I'll read it to you. For truly you have rejected us, bitterly raged against us. So the rabbis do not want us to end on that despairing a note. So what the practice is for the person reading to go through all 22 verses, and then for the congregation to then go back to the 21st verse, that much more positive one. Say that or sing it according to the trope if you can, and then the reader also repeats that more positive verse 21. So I'll pause briefly when we get there. If you want to kind of sing to yourself, sing out loud there at your screen, please do, and then I'll repeat it. And then we'll talk a little bit when we're done about kind of moving towards a place of hope, as that practice kind of instructs us to do. Zichor Adonai me'aya lanu, habita u'et cherpatenu, nachalatenu nefcha lezarim, batenu lenocharim. Yitomim hayinu ve'ena v'imotenu ke'almanot, Meimenu v'chasef shatinu eitzenu, v'mechir yavo. Al tzavarenu nirdafnu, yaganu v'lo nachlanu. Mitzrayim natanu yad, Ashur lisboa lachem. Avotenu chatuv beinaham, v'anachnu avonotehem savalnu. Avadim mashalu vanu porek ein miadam. V'nafshenu navi lachmenu mipenei cherv hamidbar. Orenu ketanur nichmaru mipenei zalafot ra'av. Nashim b'tzion inu betulot be'arei Yehuda. Sarim v'yadam nitalu penei zakenim lo nedaru. Bachurim tichon nasa'u unarim ba'etz kashalu. Zakenim mishar shavatu. Bachurim minaginatam. Shavat mesos lipenu, nepach level mecholenu. Nafalat teret roshenu, oy nalanu, ki chatanu. Al zeh haya daver lipenu, aleile chashechu einenu. Al har Tzion sheshameim shualim hilchu vo. Ata Adonai leolam teshev kisacha ledor vador. Lama lanetzach tishkachenu ta'azvenu leorech yamim. Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva chadesh yameinu kekedem. Ki ma'os me'asanu katzafta aleinu ad me'od. Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva chadesh yameinu kekedem.
Thank you.
There's less time for people to share there. I don't know. Were there reflections you wanted to share?
I think you gave a great intro to the last chapter, and that the author or authors had Rahmanas, had mercy on us, in terms of keeping it short. And so the notes here are thank you, and I know this wasn't joyful for anyone, but it hopefully offered some level of catharsis and ability to look at the community that we see here and be grateful for our community of Jewish people. And I will now turn it over to you, Rabbi.
Thanks, Mira, and thanks again to everyone for sharing your reflections. It really, really made it very meaningful for me. So one of the other traditions of Tisha B'Av is a genre of liturgy called keynote, which are kind of laments. The broader genre is called piyut, which is kind of liturgical poetry. There used to be, thousands of them, most of which have been lost, but when you counter them, Adon Olam, Ein Keloheinu, things like that, those are kind of simple ones that stuck around, but we have a lot more on the high holidays, but these used to abound, and there's a whole genre specifically for Tisha B'Av and for mourning called keynote. Not the English word keynote, but it's like a wailing sort of liturgy. So we did want to sing Elit Zion, which is, I think, the most well-known kina. If anyone went to a conservative or Orthodox summer camp, I'm sure you sang it. And again, there's really difficult imagery here, and in some ways it's more accessible language. It's not biblical Hebrew. It's more, rabbinic medieval Hebrew, but it does at the very end turn towards towards prayer, kind of a hopeful note that maybe there's a way out of this through reconnection with God. So we'll sing Elit Zion, and then we're going to open the chat once more as we did at the beginning. And I'll kind of give you the prompt then, but we're still in this place of mourning with this kina, but at the very, very end, moving into a place of hope and prayer. So that's where we'll go with that chat, after the open chat afterwards. I really find this hard to sing, actually, when I'm singing it, in a room full of people. in my synagogue, I have to kind of fight the urge to harmonize because, sometimes I can't help it because it's such a beautiful melody and it's very easy to harmonize with. And then I think, how can I be making this more beautiful, these words? On that note. Eli Tzion ve'areha, kemo isha v'tzireha, v'chivtu lach haguratzak, Abba neureha, alei armon asher nutash, ve'ashmatzon adareha, ועל ביאת מכור פאר, בתוך מקדש חדריה. עלי גלות משרתיה, נעימי שיר זמריה, ועל דמם אשר שופך, כמו מימי יאוריה, עלי הגיון מחוליה, אשר דמם בעריה, ועל אשר שמן, וביטול סנהדריה. עלי זבחי תמידיה, ופתאוני בכוריה, ועל חילול כלי היכל, ומזבח קטוריה, עלי דפי מלאכיה, בני דוד גביריה, ועל יופיים אשר חשך, ויצרו חטריה, עלי כבוד אשר גלה, בעת חורבן דביריה, ועל לוחץ אשר לחץ, ושם שקים חגוריה, עלי מחט ורוב מכות, אשר הוכו נזיריה, ועל ניפוץ אלי סלע, עולה לנהריה, עלי שמחת משנאה, ושוך כמה שבריה, ועל עינוי בני חורים, נתיבי הטהוריה, עלי פשע אשר עבדה, צלו דרך אשוריה, ועל צבאות כהלכה, שזופיה שחוריה, עלי קולות מחורפיה, בעת רב ופגריה, ועל רגשת מגדריה, בתוך משכן חצריה, עלי שמך אשר חולל, בפי קמי מצריה, ועל תחן ישבו לך, כשוב ושמע אמריה, אלי ציון ועריה, כמו אישה וצעירה, וכיבתו לך הגורצה, Abba neureha. The words just now were making me think about some of the reflections that were shared at the very beginning, people thinking about very personal losses in your own families. I think part of what makes these texts powerful, I think. But that kina especially, you can imagine this woman, this bereft woman. It's a way of making this sort of massive scale communal tragedy, very, very relatable to anyone who's experienced grief. I forgot to mention beforehand that it's also an acrostic. All right, so as promised, we did want to turn to kind of a hopeful note. So we had that hint of it with the last verse about prayer and Elitzion. We had it at the end of the 5th chapter of Eicha with the repeated penultimate verse about returning to God and renewing our days as of old. And we had that longer piece in the 3rd chapter about hope and faith and comfort. And actually in the weeks, the Shabbatot coming up, there are also liturgical choices that the rabbis who kind of set the cycle of scriptural readings for the year made choices there to read texts of comfort. So I think if we needed to kind of validate the idea that there's supposed to be hope at the end of this, I think that that those elements of the service in the upcoming weeks, for those who go to services, it really sends a message there not to dwell in a place of sorrow and grief and destruction forever, but they're really part of creating this vessel of the day and the book and this communal space together is a little bit to contain it. Not obviously not that we don't feel fear and grief and anxiety and all the things that you all shared at other times, but there's something to be said for kind of creating a concentrated space for it that allows you to be in it and then also come out of it. So we wanted to open the chat again at the end to invite some reflections on what you might be hoping for or praying for coming out of this mourning experience, and just brief thoughts as you did at the beginning. I know that politics are on our minds a lot these days in the US, and obviously all kinds of global issues related to Israel. So we want to respect this being a diverse, politically diverse space. But if you think of something political, maybe think, what's the real thing that I'm praying for beyond the politics? What's the vision that we're hoping and praying for now? So I'm going to open the chat and see what folks are writing.
I'm getting some private messages of, may the hostages come home, may people who are sick be healed. May we have feelings of calm and security. Sherry, I like this. Peace, always praying for peace. A better world.
And then I'll read a few from the public chat, praying for the survival of Israel. We, the Jews, are still here. Forgiveness, a better world, peace in Israel. There is hope. Hoping for calmness and security. Thank you, Naomi Stein. I pray that our maidens and youth will no longer be in captivity. Amen, amen. Return of the hostages, lasting peace. Pray for Israel. Connection to the divine. That's beautiful. May all be connected to the divine so that there can only be peace. Oh, we're all here tonight making the world a better place. I thank you to Paul for writing that. I remember having kind of a moment of professional doubt as a rabbi many years ago. I was talking with a friend who works in the social justice space, and I was saying, what am I doing here? Just doing services and ritual stuff instead of like, being out there actually making the world a better place. And he said, you're crazy. If we don't have these spaces, these ritual spaces and spaces of communal gathering, like we have no inner strength to and source of inspiration to go out and do the work. So I really appreciate, Paul. That's how, I don't know if that's how you meant it, but that's how I'm reading your comment, that kind of being in this space of ritualized communal mourning and introspection, hopefully will then inspire us to go out and try to manifest some of these hopes and prayers, these beautiful hopes and prayers that you all are putting in the chat.
I say amen to everything you just said, Rabbi, and to all the hopes in the chat. And before we close out, can you give us a brief intention as we close down our computers for the evening?
I was going to say something else, but I'm really thinking about how like I've never had, someone said the most meaningful Eicha reading I've been to, or something like that. I think it actually is for me also. I've never had an Eicha reading like this where the ancient text is just interwoven with these just very real layers that everyone's adding to it. So the message that I'm taking from it and that I'll share with you is that right, despite the immense suffering of COVID, there were these which for me was a very hard, isolating time. There were these weird silver linings. Made my son's life calmer right after his parents got divorced. We suddenly discovered this world of online learning. There were these strange silver linings in the midst of tragedy. So too with the horrors of October 7th that we would never wish for. There's also been tremendous displays of Jewish unity coming out of that just here in Teaneck, New Jersey, where I live, I've never seen anything like it. So, and likewise, this virtual space that really became an intensely connected space. I think for a lot of us, it seems like, despite however far flung we are geographically. So I guess my closing kavanah is for us to be able to have the capacity to look for and find the possibilities for hope and inspiration and comfort amidst circumstances where we might not think it's there. And thank you, everyone.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.